Okay, so it's all good? Good to go? Okay. One thing I wanted to tell you before we begin is that a lot of students expressed an interest in coming to the United States to stay at my house and study English. So you should watch the website. We will have some more information about that very soon. If anyone wants to come beginning in January, you will need to get your visa right away. So watch the website and see what comes through, more details. I'm looking forward to having some of you come early next year. Okay, let us begin with reading the paragraph we finished with last week and moving into the new material. Now, I want to tell you that you are a student, probably most of you are students of Olavo, and it is possible that you will know more about the philosophy in today's lesson than I do. When I read the passage for today, I discussed it with Alessandro, and he and I had good discussion about what the content really meant. And he said that this is something Olavo has taught in his class. Now, I don't speak Portuguese, so I have not been able to study with Olavo, except personally when we talk about the book. So if you understand something that I don't seem to be getting, please send a chat message or an email right in real time, and it will come through and we can interact during this class. Okay, but I will do my best to explain what the English text means in terms of the vocabulary and the grammar, and also share with you what I have gleaned from discussing with Alessandro about the philosophical meaning. Okay, so we are now going to begin to read on page 38. The last paragraph, beginning with the words, "I hadn't thought." Okay, page 38, last paragraph. This is what we finished last week, and then I will move into new material. Page 38. I hadn't thought of either of the two essays of Polanyi's, to which I send my pupils first, as falling under social studies. But certainly real attention paid to sense-giving and sense-reading, along with the logic of tacit inference, both in the book entitled Knowing and Being, might have brought home to Andreski that social, in the use of the word he consistently endorses, is essentially and insidiously reductive, devitalizing, as it does, the supremely important concept of society. It might, at any rate, have induced some uneasiness in him when, in writing, for example, the following, he had to recognize how habitually he had presented the reader with much of the same kind of choice, a choice offered as one between real thought on the one hand and undisciplined self-indulgence or emotionality on the other. Quote, "Nonetheless, the great Cartesian tradition of clear and logical thinking has withered and made room for a predilection for mystification." Page 208. But that would have involved his having registered that Polanyi had attacked the Cartesian dualism, on which the ideal of logic and clarity depends, with all the formidableness of a subtle mind that was both profoundly original and rigorously trained. Attacked it out of a training very different from that of which I make myself an advocate in this book, and with an approach very different from mine. A basic assumption of Andreski's is that the Cartesian dualism is unassailable, having been established for good. If you have any questions about any constructions in that paragraph, please email or chat. Otherwise, I'm going to go on. I'm going on, but we can be interrupted. All right, don't hesitate to interact. Polanyi, as an epistemologist, insists that what for philosophers is mind is there only in individual minds, and that an individual mind is always a person's, and a person has a body and a history. His mind is the mind of his body, and his body is the body of his mind. The dualism that has defeated so many epistemologies is eliminated here, for Polanyi enforces this insistence in an account of knowing, thinking, and discovering, in which he emphasizes the tacit element in these, and makes it plain that they could not have been at all if mind had not been the mind of a body, since on the un-Cartesian actuality this last formulation points to depends the essential part in them played by the tacit, depends the process by which we acquire knowledge that we cannot tell, which is essential even to a trained sociologist's thinking. I pay due respect to Andreski when I say that I cannot believe that if, relaxing his Cartesian certitude, he had really read the two essays to which I have referred, he would have been able to dispute with confidence this conclusion. And I'll go on to read the conclusion. All knowledge falls into one of these two classes. It is either tacit or rooted in tacit knowledge. Okay, let's stop there and look at this paragraph. I found this paragraph rather difficult to take apart. So maybe it'll be easier for you because you have been taught the philosophy by Aula. But let's see what the words say. Polanyi, as an epistemologist, insists. Now, I want to make sure everyone understands what an epistemologist is, because I had to look it up. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy that is concerned with how we know what we know. It's concerned with the mechanics of knowledge. Okay? So, as an epistemologist, Polanyi insists that what for philosophers is mind is there only in individual minds. Now, I want to point out that we have quotation marks around mind. Sorry, just one. And around the word there. I tried to emphasize that when I read out loud. by my tone. I said, what for philosophers is mind is there only in individual minds. The reason it's in quotations like this is because he is talking about what they call mind, how they use the word. It's not talking about mind as Polanyi and you and I and even Descartes would use the word. It is talking about the concept, mind. And then when he says is there, again, he is trying to emphasize that the word there itself requires explanation. And what one person means by there may not be what we're talking about. And it's using there in a special way. Okay? So, but what he's saying is what for philosophers is mind is there only in individual minds. Okay, if something is there, that means it exists. I say the pencil is there because there is one there. Okay, so what philosophers call mind exists only in individuals. Now, what do philosophers call mind? When he says what for philosophers is mind, means what they think of when they refer to the word mind. Now, this is where I spoke to Alessandro to understand what Descartes believed about mind. As you know, we've been talking about the Cartesian dualism, in which you have the material, the whole natural universe, and then you have this immaterial, this other dimension, this out there, insubstantial, subjective plane of being. Now, for Descartes, mind was not equivalent to something in the material world like brain. The brain is material. It can be weighed and measured. It's material. But mind was something that existed in the other place, the subjective. And for Descartes, he understood mind to be cut off, purely separate from the material universe. When he said, I think, therefore I am, he was saying that the only thing he could be sure of was that he, as in his mind, existed. And the only way he knew he existed was because he was able to think. And if a person can think, then they must exist. However, for him, the only thing he was sure of was his existence. He was not sure of anything else. He had no other concrete reference, no anchor in the material world. So for him, he conceived of mind as something completely unattached from the material world and from anything objective, even language or history or social contact or even direct experience. This postulated mind was disconnected. Now, what Polanyi is saying, now according to this is the concept of mind that is in quotation marks, this Cartesian conception of mind. That's what philosophers call mind. But what Polanyi is saying is that this unattached, floating entity does not exist. Polanyi says what philosophers call mind, only exists in actual individuals. So Polanyi points out that Descartes' view of mind is only a hypothesis which never exists, because mind always exists in context. It is intimately connected to the material universe. It is intertwined with actual experience and actual input through the senses, sensory input. It is connected inextricably with the body. So, when he says that what for philosophers is mind is there only in individual minds, he is saying that the Cartesian ideal of mind does not exist in actuality. Never. It is there only in individual minds, and that an individual mind is always a person's, and a person has a body and a history. So, the abstract concept of mind does not actually exist. It is always an individual mind, which is belonging to an individual person, and that individual person always has a body through which he connects to the material world through the senses, and has a history through which he connects to the human world and all of its human contacts, social contacts, human experiences. So, it is always a person's, and a person has a body and a history. His mind is the mind of his body, and his body is the body of his mind. His mind is the mind of his body. That means that, on the surface it means they are connected. But if you go a little deeper, you can think about why are they connected. Well, the mind is shaped by the experiences and sensory inputs of the body. So the mind has been conformed to fit this body, this person. The mind has been shaped. Okay, so this mind is the mind of this body, and his body is the body of his mind. So the mind, from the point of view of the mind, it has one tool to use to connect to the material universe, and that is this body, these eyes, these ears, this nose, this mouth, these sensory neurons. These are the ones that I use to connect me to the universe. These are mine. They belong to my mind. And if they don't work well, that's my mind's problem. And if my body has a tendency to generate chemicals that cause me to be depressed, then my mind will be impacted and shaped by that. Or if my healthy body causes me to have chemicals which make me happy, well, my mind will be affected by that. This body belongs to this mind. So from the point of view of my mind, I have one tool to use. And then from the point of view of my body, I feed to this mind and shape it to conform to my needs and to who I am. So they are inextricably interwoven. The dualism that has defeated so many epistemologies is eliminated here. The dualism that says the mind exists unconnected to the material world has apparently defeated many epistemologies. Now, defeated means caused the epistemology to be shown to be wrong. So someone thinks, this is how we know. But then their Cartesian dualistic influence says, well, that couldn't be right. That must not be right. So that epistemology is defeated by the Cartesian dualism. Now, I'm not enough of a student of philosophy to know how and when and where this happened, but that's what defeated so many epistemologies means. And it says this dualism, which has defeated so many epistemologies, is eliminated here. So, what Polanyi has done is he has flatly denied the dualism. He has said it is not true. It is never true. An unattached mind floating in another dimension, unconnected to a history, unconnected to language, unconnected to its own input sources, never exists. It only exists in a context. Well, when you do that, when you get rid of this dualism, then you can have a new epistemology that fits our experience better. Because we all know that our mind is shaped by our context. And also, this epistemology of Polanyi defeats the Cartesian dualism. It goes the other way. Because the Cartesian dualism has the material over here and the immaterial over here, and no connection at all. Whereas in Polanyi's epistemology, you bring the body and the mind so close, they're not only touching, they are actually intertwined inextricably. So there is no dualism. Each depends on the other. The mind is the mind of this body. The body is the body of this mind. They are brought together. The dualism is defeated. The dualism doesn't defeat the epistemology in this case. And it's cool to me to know that this is Polanyi, who was a trained scientist, who came up with this. Anyway, I like that. Okay. For Polanyi enforces this insistence in an account of knowing, thinking, and discovering, in which he emphasizes the tacit element in these and makes it plain that they could not have been at all if mind had not been the mind of a body. Let's stop there. It's only the first half, but that's enough to start with. Okay, beginning with the first word, for. That connects it to the previous concept with causation. So, you can substitute because. So, the previous sentence, I'm going to change it with the word because. His mind is the mind of his body, and his body is the body of his mind. The dualism that has defeated so many epistemologies is eliminated here because Polanyi enforces this insistence. Okay? It's defeated because Polanyi enforces this insistence in an account of knowing, thinking, and discovering. Okay, let's define what this insistence is. It goes back to the first sentence. Polanyi insists that what for philosophers is mind is there only in individual minds. So it's the insistence is the insistence that the Cartesian conception of mind is false. It doesn't exist. Mind only exists in context. Okay? For Polanyi enforces this insistence in an account of knowing, thinking, and discovering. An account. Why does he use that word? By the word account, he means a description of the process. Okay? He enforces. What does enforces mean? He pushes the point. He makes his assertion, he supports his assertion by giving an account of how we know. How we know, think, and discover. Okay, by describing how we know, think, and discover. Okay, so, starting again. For Polanyi enforces this insistence in an account of knowing, thinking, and discovering, in which he emphasizes the tacit element in these, and makes it plain that they could not have been at all if mind had not been the mind of a body. The emphasis on the tacit element is what enforces Polanyi's idea of how we think. I'm going to take one more crack at explaining this sentence because it seems very unclear to me. For Polanyi enforces this insistence in an account of knowing, thinking, and discovering, in which he emphasizes the tacit element in these, and makes it plain that they could not have been at all if mind had not been the mind of a body. So, what he's saying is, if his idea of mind being the mind of a body wasn't true, then there could be no tacit element in knowing, thinking, and discovering. Since on the un-Cartesian actuality this last formulation points to depends the essential part in them played by the tacit. Okay, let's get the core of that phrase. Since on something big long thing.
Margarita.
Mm-hmm.
The student just sent by email a link for a definition of what Michael Polanyi means by tacit element, and I thought it would be helpful for you. Can I read it?
Yes. Shall I repeat it as you read it? Okay, let me tell you. A student has sent a link about what Polanyi means by the tacit element. And Alessandro is going to read it, and then I'm going to repeat what he says.
I shall reconsider human knowledge by starting from the fact that we can know more than we can tell, writes Michael Polanyi.
Okay, repeat the first half.
I shall reconsider human knowledge
I shall reconsider human knowledge
by starting from the fact
that
we can know more than we can tell.
That we can know more than we can tell.
Writes Michael Polanyi.
Writes Michael Polanyi.
The tacit dimension, which books,
the tacit dimension, which is the name of one of his books,
argues that tacit knowledge, tradition,
inherited practices,
implied values,
and prejudgments
is a crucial
is a crucial
part of scientific knowledge.
part of scientific knowledge. Okay. So we can know more than we can say is the tacit element. And knowing more than we can say is crucial to scientific knowledge. Okay, let's get this phrase here. Since on the uncartesian actuality this last formulation points to depends the essential part in them played by the tacit. Since on this depends the essential point played by the tacit. By the way, thank you to the student who sent that link. That's very helpful. Very helpful. Okay, so since on this depends the essential point, the essential part played by the tacit. Okay. Now, what is this? The uncartesian actuality this last formulation points to. Uncartesian actuality. So we have the Cartesian dualism, which isn't true, doesn't exist, and the uncartesian actuality. And the uncartesian actuality is the basis of the tacit. So he is able to enforce his insistence that there is no Cartesian duality, but rather an uncartesian actuality of unity. He's able to enforce that by pointing to the fact that on this depends the essential part played by the tacit. Okay. And the tacit could not have been at all if mind had not been the mind of a body. Okay. So he's just trying to prove that what he's saying is true. And after he says this, he adds another phrase, depends the process by which we acquire knowledge that we cannot tell. So on the non-Cartesian actuality depends both the tacit and the process by which we acquire knowledge that we cannot tell, which is essential even to a trained sociologist's thinking. I pay due respect to Andreski when I say that I cannot believe that if, relaxing his Cartesian certitude, he had really read the two essays to which I have referred, he would have been able to dispute with confidence this conclusion. So, I pay due respect to Andreski when I say he is saying he has confidence that Andreski, if he didn't have Cartesian certitude and had read the essays to which he had referred, he would not have been able to dispute the conclusions. The conclusion, all knowledge falls into one of these two classes. It is either tacit or rooted in tacit knowledge. So Levis is saying that Andreski would agree with Poliani if he could get rid of his Cartesian worldview. And of course, Levis agrees with Polanyi as well. Okay, all knowledge falls into one of these two classes. It is either tacit or rooted in tacit knowledge. This is Polanyi. The ideal of a strictly explicit knowledge is indeed self-contradictory. Deprived of their tacit coefficients, all spoken words, all formula, all maps and graphs are strictly meaningless. Again, to me, the English here is very clear. The philosophical aspect is less clear to me. You probably understand it better than I. The ideal, meaning we believe this is out there and that it exists, of a strictly explicit knowledge is self-contradictory. First of all, it doesn't exist. And second of all, it cannot exist. Because that's what self-contradictory means. It cannot exist because all knowledge is rooted in the tacit, I guess. Deprived of their tacit coefficients, so the tacit component, all spoken words, all formula, all maps and graphs are strictly meaningless. I wonder what it means. You tell me on text and email if you think this is wrong. I wonder if it means that when you speak a word, it has... Remember we talked about 3 understandings of a word. You've got the ABC understanding. Cat is a 3-letter word beginning with a consonant and ending with a consonant with a vowel in the middle. That's one understanding of a word. A second is the ideal of a cat. And the third is an actual cat. Could it be that he's saying that if you deprive a word of its tacit coefficient, you would deprive it of at least this one? Okay, this is the ideal of a cat, which we think of cats as a category. If you take that away, then the word itself really will lose its meaning. I wonder if that's what this means. So, deprived of their tacit coefficients, all spoken words, all formula, all maps and graphs are strictly meaningless. Actually, it doesn't make much sense to me. It seems to me that maps and graphs could keep their meaning. So I have to say I don't understand the philosophy discussed here. But strictly meaningless means meaningless in a narrow sense. Technically meaningless. An exact mathematical theory means nothing unless we recognize an inexact, non-mathematical knowledge on which it bears, and a person whose judgment upholds this bearing. That seems true to me, that if you have a mathematical model and it doesn't describe anything real, then it's just a bunch of numbers going by. It has to retain its connection to organic reality somehow for it to have meaning. So, and it goes one step further, saying a person whose judgment upholds. A person who says, here's a mathematical model. Supposing we have data on a graph. And then a computer creates a model that predicts a graph that looks like this. A person has to say, this is close enough. We will use this model. The computer cannot say, this is close enough, unless you program it to have a margin of error, at which point it might not be able to make a graph of this. So we need a person, and that blows the Cartesian thing out of the water. So back to Levis. Feel free to jump in with your chats and emails if you want to. Here, I'm reading again now. Here, for the discipline. Oh, by the way, I'll probably talk to Olavo about this, and maybe I'll come back with more to tell you next week. I'm going to make a note. So we'll see if Olavo can shed any more light, if anything more needs to be said. Here, for the discipline of thought, I am contending for. Okay, so here, for the discipline of thought I am contending for, the effective recognition of it as intellectually and culturally necessary, we have something like an extra-literary charter. It is the extra-literary nature of his approach, that of a distinguished scientist, whose impelling interest was the nature of scientific discovery, that makes Polanyi so valuable an ally. His realization that mind is always an individual mind, a unique person's and the mind of a body, has an obvious bearing on the problem or crux for thought, it's difficult to decide how it should be referred to, that Andreski raises. But, most significantly, may be said to be hardly aware he raises, in a passage I shall quote. It is for explicit thought, the fundamental challenge that cannot escape being recognized as such by those who make the very different approach to it from Polanyi's that is my concern here. The approach by way of what should be the literary student's approach to language. And then he goes into Andreski's passage. Okay, so let's go back and just make sure we understand this paragraph. Okay, here, referring to the paragraph above, the quote above, for the discipline of thought I am contending for, the English literary approach, the effective recognition of it as intellectually and culturally necessary, we have something like an extra-literary charter. Okay, so he's saying that Levis is fighting for an approach to the development of mature thinking that takes a literary pathway, which he says is culturally and intellectually necessary. But Polanyi gives an extra-literary charter. That is, Polanyi supports the same goal from outside of literature. So it is, it's outside of the pathway Levis is talking about, yet it supports the assumptions. So that's very good from Levis's point of view. It is the extra-literary nature of his approach, extra-literary, outside of literature, nature of his approach to the development of thought and to the understanding of how we know things, that of a distinguished scientist whose impelling interest was the nature of scientific discovery. So his approach is from a scientific point of view rather than a literary point of view. That makes Polanyi so valuable an ally. His realization that mind is always an individual mind, a unique person's mind, the mind of a body, has an obvious bearing on the problem or crux for thought. It is difficult to decide how it should be referred to. That Andruski raises, but most significantly, may be said to be hardly aware he raises. Okay, so Polanyi's realization that mind is an individual mind is relevant to the problem Andruski has, but Andruski doesn't realize he has it. He's just mildly uncomfortable with the fact that he has to call his fellow scientists to an ethical standard which his basic assumptions make impossible. So he's uncomfortable. He's got an inconsistency that he doesn't really see, but Levis sees it, and Polanyi's assertions have an obvious bearing, have an obvious connection, are obviously connected, but in fact they shed light on Andruski's problem, a problem Andruski really doesn't see clearly himself. Okay, in a passage I shall quote. So it's but most significantly may be said to be hardly aware he raises, in a passage I shall quote. Okay, it is, for explicit thought, the fundamental challenge that cannot escape being recognized as such by those who make the very different approach to it from Polanyi's, that is my concern. Now, Polanyi's approach is scientific. The very different approach is literary. The approach by way of what should be the literary student's approach to language. Okay, so, all right, here's Andruski's passage. In the old debate about whether the individual is more important than the group, or the other way around, the issues have been obscured by the constant use of the expression the individual. Because strictly speaking, there is no such thing as the individual.
Margarita,
Yes,
are you already on page 40, right?
I am on page 40.
Yeah, but you don't have this page.
You don't have this page. Well, we need to make you have more pages. Well, in that case, I'm not sure what we should do.
Let's take a break and see if they have some questions or remarks.
Okay, let's take a break, and I encourage you, we could have some extra time here. If you would like to make some remarks, if you would like to share thoughts, or if you would like to raise any other questions, this would be our opportunity to have more interaction. If you do, I will read them out so that other students can read what you've said. And if you want, we can have more discussion. Other than that, we will get more pages up soon. And also, I'm going to discuss this more with Olavo so that I have more of an understanding of the philosophy behind it. So, we'll take a little break. Feel free to send something either in Portuguese or English, because Alessandro can translate. So, take a little break, and I hope to hear from you. Otherwise, I'll be back in 5 minutes to say goodbye. Excuse me for taking so long. I got into conversation with Alessandro, and we almost continued forever. So then I wouldn't be seeing you right now. But there are 2 comments, so let's hear them. I'm going to have Alessandro read it, then I'll repeat it to you.
Okay, one student says, on page 39,
on page 39,
there is an expression, quote-unquote, for good.
Quote-unquote, for good. It's at the top, second line.
I read it before.
I read it before.
I don't remember where.
I don't remember where.
I'm sorry. I read before saw other similar constructions, but I don't remember where.
I read before a similar construction, but I don't remember where.
For instance, for the worse, for the best.
For instance, I'm going to correct what he said. He means for better or for worse.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
Could you explain the difference between them?
Okay.
For good, for worse, for better.
Okay, so we have two phrases. For good and for better or for worse. Okay, for good. And then for better or for worse. And let me think for a second. For better or worse. Well, there's actually another phrase that's very close that was in my mind, and maybe it'll come back to me. But let me, and if it does, I'll stop and write it down. But for good usually means forever, permanent. Okay, permanent. So I could say, for instance, supposing my friend is leaving and going to live in a new city, I could say, are you going away for good? For good means forever. Are you going away for good? It means permanently. It does not mean that the outcome is good. It means that the outcome is permanent. Okay. Now, for better or worse, this phrase here exists in the marriage ceremony. We vow to be faithful to each other for better or for worse, in richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. For better or for worse, in that case, means if the situation becomes better, I become rich, more blessed, or the situation becomes worse, everything is bad. No matter, in other words, it means no matter what happens. For good or for ill has a similar meaning. We say, I made the decision. For good or for ill, it is done. That suggests that I made a decision. I do not know whether the outcome will be good or bad, but it is finished, it is done. It cannot be changed. So in that sense, it's close to for good, but it's used differently. These phrases usually imply uncertainty about whether the outcome will be good or bad in something which has been decided. Whereas this one simply emphasizes that it is decided permanently. Is that clear? Good enough? Okay, there was a second comment or question?
Yeah, another student. Margarita, do you know something about URI, United Religions Initiative? And if you know, what do you think about this? Thank you.
The student is asking, do I know anything about URI, United Religions Institute, did you say? Initiative. I do not know anything about that. United Religions Initiative. No idea. Sorry. I could look it up. Maybe I'll try to find some information about it over the week. I should write it down. Okay, is there anything else, Alessandro?
No, that's all.
Okay, we're done. I'm going to get a new scan of more pages, and we'll be back next week. And keep watching the website for more information about coming to the United States. You'll have to work on getting your visa immediately if you want to come. And we can only accept 5 people at a time. And that will be tight squeeze. I'll look forward to meeting you if you come. See you. Bye.